If you only have 1 hour to learn Next.js, then this is the video for you. If you're new here, hi, my name is Zoe. I'm a software engineer and former university professor that loves teaching folks how to code. Today, we're gonna learn Next.js in 1 hour by building this web app. Let's get started. All right, so what we're gonna be building here is just a really straightforward sort of single page application that basically is gonna display a bunch of planets and some data about each of them. So pretty straightforward. If you do wanna follow along with this, this is a design I got from Frontend Mentor. They have a ton of great designs. This is one of their premium designs, so you do have to pay to get all the assets. But if you want to follow along, definitely think it's worth the subscription if you can afford it. So what we're going to do first, I'm going to head over to Next.js, and I'm just going to go into their documentation and see what their installation process is, because usually they have pretty good documentation. So I'm going to head over to the side here in the installation. There are two ways to install this, but because we're trying to do this quickly, we're going to use their automatic installation. So what that means is we're going to access this package called Create Next App. So I'm just going to copy this command here. I'm going to head over. I have a terminal window open here, and I'm just going to go ahead and create that. So it's going to say npx create next app at latest, and I'm also just going to give it a name. So you can do that by just putting a space and typing in the name there. So I'm going to say Planet Facts Site. I'm going to create that. And then it's going to ask me a whole bunch of starter questions. So first one, do I want to use TypeScript? Yes. Do I want to use ESLint? Yes. Do I want to use Tailwind CSS? I'm going to say no for this project because I'm going to actually install Material UI, but feel free to use it if you prefer to. It automatically selected no for me, and you'll see that it kind of bounces between no and yes depending on what they recommend. So for this one, they said no. Would you like your code inside a source directory? No. App router? Yes. App router is the new router or the newish router compared to the Pages router, which is an older router that they support. Would definitely recommend using app router. I think it's a bit more performant than Pages router. So I'm going to use that. I'm not going to use TurboPack, and I'm not going to customize the alias. So it's going to go ahead and install all of that. It's created a new folder at Planet Facts Site. And so this is the folder that I'm working with here. Now, a couple other things. Because I've downloaded the project from Frontend Mentor, I get a whole bunch of assets, like the images that you saw of the planets, as well as some data. So I'm going to go ahead and drop those into this folder, just so I have access to that as I'm working on it. I'm going to go ahead and drop the assets into the public folder, just because I know that these are images and that's going to be the best way to access them. And then I'm just going to drop the data into the larger folder, and we'll modify it once we open this up. So the next thing I'm going to want to do here is open up my project in VS Code. So let's do that. All right, so I have VS Code open. I see my Planet's Facts site, and I'm going to go ahead and open that up. Perfect. So now it's open and we're good to go. And you'll see that it actually has two green folders and files, one folder and file. That's the assets that I modified. So I added in the images here and the data.json. Oh, it looks like I didn't quite drop it in the public folder. Move it into public. All right, there we go. We're good to go there. So I'm going to start up a new terminal. And I'm going to go ahead and install, it's already installed, and you can tell this because the no modules folder is there. I'm just going to go ahead and do npm run dev. This will create, I believe, a .next folder though. So we'll let that run. And awesome, it's spun up in a couple of milliseconds. So let's hop over here to our localhost 3000 and see if that's running. Awesome. So yeah, we've gotten it started. It's good to go. Now, if you don't want to build this site, feel free. This is, the beginning of the starter. But if you want to go ahead and build a site with us, let's continue. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder for the data and drop my data.json file in there. And this is just because I want to be really clear about my file folder structure. I don't want to necessarily confuse things. So looking at the starter kit, looking at what it's given us, we have a tsconfig. We have readme, we have package.json, these are all normal, package.json, we have a next config, a next env, and then an ESLint config. Now one thing I do want to change is this next, I'm going to remove this next TypeScript for the ESLint. I find it super strict and it causes a lot more errors than it's worth. You can leave it in for sure because it's actually going to remove a lot of the TypeScript typing, but for the purposes of this tutorial and without over customizing this starter, I'm just going to remove it for now. So we have our git ignore, which is ignoring files like our node or folders like our next module and our .next. And then we have the public folder, as we talked about before, with the assets. And then we have our data, talked about that already. And finally, we have our app folder. So our app folder is where everything basically lives in this app, in this web app. So you'll have your layout folder, which will be the sort of general HTML, CSS sort of larger section there. And then you'll have your page, which basically is everything that lives within that layout folder. So it's good to understand this file structure because we're about to go ahead and modify it. So with this page, I'm going to see that's all this stuff that we're seeing here. I'm just going to go ahead and clear it out because we're going to start from scratch essentially with our stylings. I'm just going to return a basic div. I'm going to remove these two imports and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the stylings, the page specific stylings. We'll leave that alone. Taking a look at our page, you see we're still in dark mode. So I'm going to take a look at my globals and see what sort of changes that are made there. Looking at the design, I think it's fine. What I'll probably do is just change. I'll remove these two and the dark styling. And I think other than that, we do want to keep some of these reset styles because they do, like it removes the text decoration from our A tags, which are links, things like that, which we do want to keep. It, sets the margins to 0, the padding to 0, so there's not that like extra weird margin there. It already sets the max width of our body. So there are a lot of good things in the globals.css file that you might want to keep around. Feel free to change them if you don't. You can completely start from scratch, but I'm going to keep a few of them. All right, so now that I've modified both of those, you see we have a blank white page. I'm going to go ahead and start building out our actual app. So looking at our design here, I usually like to start from top to bottom as I find it's the easiest way to build out a project like this. So I'll start with the nav and then I'll work on this middle section here and we'll go from there. So starting with the nav, I'm going to actually create one more file folder. I'm going to call it components. And you don't have to do this. You can do this within your app. You can do this kind of anywhere you want to a degree within the app. But I like to create a components folder right next to my app folder so that it's really easy to access and organize my components. So the first component I'm going to create is a nav. And we're going to say nav.tsx. And what the nav is just going to be, it's going to be just that top bar that allows us to switch between different planets essentially. And the other thing I need to do before we get too far into this is I want to install Material UI. So let's go ahead to the docs of Material UI, the installation, and I'm just going to copy this command here and drop that in to my terminal. And that's going to go ahead. And I could have done it from the other terminal I had outside, but because this is here, it's fairly straightforward. So now that we've gone ahead and installed Material UI, I'm going to access some of the properties. So I'm going to access the component of box, and that's going to be really useful. And I'm going to use the default export because with Next.js, a really interesting quirk is that you'll get an error when you're using a server-side component if it's not a named export. Just something weird. Or their default export, sorry. That's something just weird that I noticed there. So we have our box. I'm gonna drop the nav on the home page. I'll turn this into a box as well. I'm defaulting to server-side components at the moment, but I will probably make a few client-side components potentially. So with the nav here, right? There are two aspects that I want. I want this sort of H1 essentially, so the title of the project, the title of the page, and then I want all of the planets here. So I could type them out and write them out individually, but that will take a little bit of time. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to create another component called navlink.tsx. And yeah, I'm using the ES7, you can see it on the right side of the page, the ES7 React Redux React Native snippets, which allow you to use these shortcuts essentially to display or mock up or create really quickly your components. So RAFCE creates a component where the export default is at the bottom. So I like it because it just speeds things up a little bit. So I'm going to create a nav link. So to create a nav link, I'm going to use the link component from Next.js because we're going to want to tap into Next.js's routing. And then in the middle, I'm going to want to have the name of whatever the planet is. So I'll call it planet name. And then I'm going to create some props. We'll say planet name. That's going to be a string. And I'll pass this props. So it's going to pass in planet name, but it's also going to pass in planet ID, which is going to be a number. We'll pass in, yeah, planet ID. And that is going to be planet ID. That's going to be our href here. And, oh, it's going to give me an error there. So I'm going to cast it as a string. And we'll use that as our ID. Now, this is going to be important when we're actually working with our individual planets, because it's going to allow us to use the routing much more effectively. I don't actually think these have an ID. So one thing I'm going to do really quickly is I'm going to go ahead and give them IDs. So we'll say ID. I'll make them numbers I'll make them strings so we don't have an issue. But I'm just going to go ahead and number all of these. Oops. And make sure to click out of them, otherwise you're going to number all of them the same thing. I use the command, I think it's Command D for that, to just select all of something that is of the same type. And you'll notice here that I'm not giving them 1, 2, 3 numbers. I'm actually 0 indexing them, and that's because it's going to make this much more easy to it's going to make it that much more easy for us to grab the data once we get to that part of the tutorial. So I've gone ahead, created the nav link, I've created the nav. I'm going to use the typography element to create that header that we saw on the side. Variant equals h1. And again, these are all Material UI specific things. So if you're not interested in using Material UI, you can use, CSS, Sass, whatever, Tailwind CSS, whatever you prefer, but this is what I'm using for this. So that's going to be the title. I'm just going to go ahead and do some basic stylings because I know it's not going to be correct. So I'm going to say font size, let's go to rem. And we'll say font weight is going to be 800. We'll save that. And then on the other side now, I want to go ahead and I'll create another box. And within this box, I want to now map through all of my elements. So I'm going to import data from data/data.json. And we're going to say data.map for each planet. We want to go ahead and return a nav link, the one that we just created. I'm going to say planet ID is going to be planet.id, and planet name is going to be planet.name. This is why I love TypeScript, because once you have everything well typed, you can it basically gives you documentation so you know that you're doing the right thing. And then it's also going to need a key, and that's also, I'm going to use the ID for that, planet.id. And cool, so we have our planets there. I'm just going to touch up the stylings here because, again, I know they're not correct. We're going to say display flex for this outer box. I'm going to say justify content, space between, so that's going to push them across the size of the page. And then we'll say align items is going to be center. And then I'll just add a little bit of padding to the top and the bottom, the left and the right. We'll add 1 rem of padding all around. And then we need a border, a bottom border. We'll say 1 pixel solid, RGBA, I think it's 255, 255, 255. And then 0.75. So this should be white, but like a little bit of a washed out white, because the white doesn't look that prominent on the page. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. One thing I forgot to do is actually get the background color, which I grabbed earlier. It's this. And I'm just going to go ahead and set that on the globals file. So we'll say background color is this. But you can grab that also from the Figma, or if I use a color picker extension here, and you can just use that and then grab whatever color you want on the page. Another thing that I need to do is set the overall color to be white. So we'll say color, and we'll save that. And there we go. We can see what we're doing here. The awesome thing about having created these nav links as sort of one thing is that now I can add in the style, and it's going to apply to all of them. So I'll say margin right is going to be 1 rem, and then it'll apply to all of them. So we get a little bit of a margin there. So that looks pretty decent to me for now. We can always do other things, add hover states, etc., etc. We could text transform it. We could say to uppercase, as it looks like in the image there that they're all uppercase. So, you know, there's a bunch of stuff we can do, but let's continue on so we can continue learning some Next.js. So I'll close with the nav link, I'll close with the nav. We're good on those fronts for now, and I'll close out that global CSS file. The next component that I'm gonna wanna create, or the next folder that I wanna create is basically, I wanna work with Next.js's routing now. Because Next.js has a particular way in which they allow you to make dynamic routes, and that's by creating a folder with whatever the parameter you want to access. Here, I'm going to use slug as a sort of default, and then you can dynamically access the page within this by accessing the slug property, or whatever property. You could name it planets, you can name it to-dos, you can name it whatever you want, but by accessing that parameter, it will now automatically render this page. So let me show you what we're talking about. So create a new file. I'm going to say page.tsx because for a page to render, it does need a page file. And again, it's page.tsx because of TypeScript, but you could use JSX if you're using JavaScript. And we have our page here. I'm actually going to call this page planet because that's what we're going to be doing there. But we could change the name later if it doesn't make sense. So we have the slug and we have the planet. Now what I want to do is I want to grab the params. So there's a property called params that comes from basically each page. And let me see if I can find the documentation on this. Fetching data. Might be routing, dynamic routes. Yeah, it's basically this. So actually, I'm going to borrow this whole piece here. So it's taking this property params, it's grabbing this property slug, and then we're going to access that slug on the page. So if I grab this as well, basically we're going to destructure it from params. I'm going to actually also have to make this async. You're going to wait for it to grab the slug from when we change the page, and then that's going to that's going to be the slug that we're going to use. Now, if you remember, I made the href, let's open up the nav link real quick. I made the href the planet ID, and I did that because I want to be able to use that as an indexing tool. Because we're using static data and we're not using an API, we're not really getting the full functionality out of how we could fetch data with the app router with Next.js. If you're using the pages router, there's a different way you could do this, but because we're using the app router, we're not sort of getting that full functionality. So in order to combine the two for this specific project instance, we added this ID parameter, and what we're going to do is use that ID in order to index and return the correct data for each planet page. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So with the slug, we are basically getting that 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. information. Data is an array, so we're going to use that slug to index that array. So I'm going to say const planet, planet equals, I'm going to import data from /data, and we're going to say planet equals data dot slug. Now we're going to have to cast it as a number because remember we've made it a string originally, so it wouldn't give us issues with the href. But now the planet should be whatever we cast the data to, whatever index we index the data, whatever data is at that index. So now before I get too far ahead of myself, let me console.log this and see if it's working, because if it's not, then there's a lot of stuff we need to do. So I'll refresh the page and I'll go ahead and inspect the page. We should have nothing right now because we are not at a particular route. But if I click on Mercury, awesome. So I get that data. It says planet, which is fine because we didn't put anything in there, but I'm getting Mercury's data. I'm getting the ID, the images, the name, etc. So that's really good. That means that we're doing something correct. So that's awesome. So, but one thing you might have noticed is that we completely lost our nav. So we want to go ahead and actually drop the nav in at the top of this page to start with, because that will ensure that we're able to actually see it consistently and it feels like a seamless experience for our user. So I'll drop in the nav there, just save that. And then now, so we have our planet, we have our slug. What I want to do at the bottom here now is really just start displaying the different components and things that we need. So looking back at our design for a second, we have this image and then we have this like text box sort of toggle situation, and then we have some data at the bottom here, and that just changes based on which page we end up on, right? Mercury, Venus, Earth, etc., etc. So for the bottom section here, I'm going to create another box, and this is going to be the larger box that holds both of these things. Because actually, rather than using a box, I'm going to use a container, because I think a container, again, this is a material UI thing, but a container allows us to set a specific width quite easily. So container, it uses a max width property, and so I can say, I don't want it to be any larger than like what they define as a large container, and that will keep the things within it within a certain range essentially. What I'm going to do here, again, just to keep things clean, I'm going to create another file called planet data. And we're going to show the planet data. Do I want to do that actually? Actually, no. Let's not use a separate file for now, because that's gonna we're gonna end up in a sort of a typing nightmare. So let's ignore that for now. But if you were sort of spending a lot of time and you want to really make this clean, definitely separate it into another file to keep things straightforward and get you guys this completed project within the hour. Let's do it this way. So I want the image on one side and I want this text situation on another. So I'm going to go ahead and I want these facts on the bottom. So I'm going to create two boxes, box number 1 and box number 2. And then in the first box, we're going to have that image. So we're going to say image is from next image. And I believe it's the source equals, let's see. So it's going to be something on our planet object. I'm going to go back there actually and look at what it looks like. It's going to be images dot planet. URL equals, I believe it's URL. I got to double check. We'll find out soon. So we'll say planet dot images dot planet, and that should be the source for that. And then it needs alt equals planet, planet image, width, we'll say 250, height, I'm just giving generic numbers for now, 250. Is it URL, is it source? Oh, it needs to lead with a slash. What does it look like? Oh, it's dot slash. I think that gives it a problem. Let me take out the dot and see if it works. No. Let me just take it out entirely. That might be the simplest way to do this. Cool, it worked. Didn't have to do anything. Actually, let me put the dot back in and see if it still works. Yeah, okay, awesome. So yeah, don't have to do anything to the data, we'll leave that alone. So we have the image, and then we have this text box. So we're gonna have probably in a typography element, I'm gonna give this a variant of H2 just so that we're semantic and we're, following along with how the page is supposed to be structured, because you only have one H1 on a page. I'm gonna say planet dot name, and then we need this data here. So this is gonna be in a generic body. We're gonna say planet dot, and this is overview right now. Overview dot content. And that's just going to be that content there. Then we'll have below that another typography element where it says source, And the source is going to be within a link. Or we could do a proper link. We could do link from next link. And then we'll say the href equals to be the planet.overview.source. And then we'll say it's Wikipedia. We'll save that. So that's this piece here. And then we have 3 buttons here that change whether or not it's internal structure, surface geology, etc., etc. We'll put that in a second just to take a look at how it looks. Awesome. So it's not looking too bad. Let's go ahead and fix up our stylings on this box. We'll say display flex. And we can make this a bit bigger. We'll say this is 500, this is 500. Maybe not so big. And again, I'm doing this specifically to my screen, but you could actually modify the style property and say, 2 view width, 10 view width, etc., or whatever works well for you. We're going to say justify content, space between. And then we're going to say width equals, let's say 50 view width. Cool. And then I want to align the item center here. Cool. And that's really basic what we want to do with that top section. Bottom section here, now I think we're actually going to create like a data box or something like that. So I'm going to say new file, we'll say data box. And what that is going to show us is, what is it? Rotation, revolution, radius, and temperature. We're going to just pass that information into this data box. So we'll say box. All right, we want to wrap this up quick before we hit that hour. It's going to be a box that has, let's see, border, 1 pixel, solid. I'm going to use that same RGBA 225, that like white, because I think it was pretty decent for the other side. So we'll say that. We'll give it some padding. Oops. Padding, 1 rem. And then will be 2 typography elements. So 1 typography element. We'll say variant equals h3 for now. And then we'll say the other typography element is going to be, it's going to semantically probably be a body element, but it's going to be, we'll style it so it looks a bit bigger. So we want it to say, we want the title, and we want the data. And we'll say interface props, we'll say title, I believe, yes, both strings. Title is a string, data is also a string. I'll say props. And so this first one's going to be the title. Second one's going to be the data. And we'll style it. We'll say maybe 1.5 rem and bold. And again, not perfect styles, just good enough for now. Cool. So that's our data box. Now we're going to use our data box in this box here. So I'm going to say data box. And there are 2 ways I could do this. I could probably map through, but if these were in a folder, I could just map through, or an array, I should say. But they're not, so I'm just going to say data box. We'll say, for the title equals planet dot rotation. Or no, sorry, title is going to be, this is fixed. This is going to be, title is rotation time. And then data, whoops, data will be planet dot rotation. And then We'll say revolution time. Revolution. We have radius and average temp. So we'll say radius. Temperature. Okay, cool. Other thing I noticed is that this needs to be uppercase. Save that. And I think, is the data already? No, the data is not uppercase, so this also needs to be to uppercase. So that's just a stylistic thing with that. All right, awesome. So we have our 4 boxes there. Pretty decent. The thing I noticed is that I need to make this a flex box. Cool. I think, oh, you know what? I need the style title here. So we'll say font size, 1 rem, font color is going to be RGBA, going with that 255. Color, not font color. Pretty good. And then I think this could probably be 2 rem. Cool, pretty decent. No, not too bad. Next thing I want to do with the outer box, again, this is back to that outside box that holds all of them. I'm going to say justify content. Let's try space between. And yeah, we do want it to stretch all the way. And then I'm going to say for each box, I want the width to be 20 view width. See how that looks. That's a bit too wide. Let's go with 15 view width. Let's try 18. I want them to all be the same width. Yeah, that looks great. Cool. Last couple of things we want to do here. So you notice this is all kind of squished near the top. I want to make this planet page essentially take up more space. So that's going to be within this this container. We're going to say height is going to be 80 view height. And then we're going to say display flex. Okay, good. And we'll say flex direction column. We'll say justify content. We want to say space between. So that it pushes them down a little bit. Or I want to say space evenly. Or I could say justify content flex end. And then I'll give some padding. Yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll say margin. Yeah, I'll give some margin on the top and the bottom for this. So again, now I'm just kind of really touching up the styles, making it fit a little bit better. You know, making sure everything lines up essentially. But if we've done this correctly, what should happen is when we click on Venus, we'll see Venus. When we click on Earth, we'll see Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. And you'll notice if you look at the slug that it's changing based on the individual planet that we have here. So that was a super, super, super quick intro tutorial to Next.js. As you see, we've used the slug. We've basically accessed the parameters here, which is something that's really useful to do if you have any sort of passing of parameters and static data. Again, if we were using data from an API, it'd be a little bit different about how we would do this. We talked about the file structure, the folder structure, how to work with static data, how to access the assets in the public folder, and how to use those in your app in terms of these images and things like that. And then how to really quickly build out components and put them together in our app. So If you enjoyed this video, please feel to give it a like. If you want to learn how to code, feel free to check out that first link in the description below. It's a link to the coding bootcamp that I teach. If you enjoy content like this, feel free to subscribe. And if you're interested in becoming a web developer this year and really starting off your career in coding, check out this playlist here. It's a playlist of 30 JavaScript challenges that are done over 30 days. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.